Thank you and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. As you probably know, I have been part of Refugee Hosts project as a local researcher in Hamra neighborhood in Beirut. And just quickly, before we start, for those of you who are not familiar with Lebanon, Hamra is a major neighborhood in Beirut, and it has a mixture of people, so it is not a poor neighborhood, it's rather a rich neighborhood. And the selection of Hamra was first question because usually people who are doing research into refugees usually go to border areas or probably to refugee camps, and so it was a very interesting selection. I was born and raised in Hamra, and it was really a very nice opportunity to be part of this project. First of all, just to give you a general information about the number of refugees in Lebanon, by September 2019, there were around 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, as the government estimates, but according to UNHCR, the number is 925,000. My presentation today is mainly divided into two parts. The first part is reflecting on the borderline and the timeline of empathy with refugees by selecting specific events throughout the years since 2011 until today that reflect how the attitude towards refugees have changed. And the second part is the question of why, and the why is not a complete answer, but it's basically from the field interviews that I've done with Leonie, my colleague, in Hamra. Briefly, let me start with what is empathy. Empathy constitutes of two main parts. It's not only the cognitive part, but it also includes the physiological reaction and response. I'll briefly present the definition of Goethe. Empathy is the capacity to think and feel oneself into the inner life of another person, the ability to experience what another person experiences, though usually and appropriately to an attenuated degree. Now, in the context of the Syrian crisis, the arrival of refugees to Lebanon created competition on resources and on the infrastructures. And this in turn led to tension between different communities in Lebanon. But at the same time, the shared culture, history, aside to local and international efforts to support, made it possible in the early years of the crisis to support refugees, at least on a minimal level. I'm taking an example from 2013. The Minister of Social Affairs then, Wael Abu Faour, said, "I don't think there is a Lebanese person in a position of authority that would accept to sleep sound with his family in their home at night, while there are children, women, and elderly Syrians, Palestinians, or Lebanese who are unable to sleep because of the cold or hunger." This was in light of an anticipated thunderstorm in Lebanon. And that's what the Minister of Social Affairs said. And as you can notice, the choice of language is so empathic. It creates a shared identity between Lebanese, Syrians, and Palestinians. And the idea of putting oneself in other shoes is also inferred. And the children, women, and elderly are highlighted, which are the most vulnerable groups. But with the increased tension and competition on one hand, and on the other, the absence of any signs that this crisis is going to end soon, the tension was increasing, and the readiness to host refugees and the empathy was declining. In 2014, the Lebanese army in Bekaa was fighting with troops coming from Syria. And by 2014 too, a minimum of 45 local curfews were imposed on Syrian refugees in different municipalities around Lebanon. With the Ministry of Interior wasn't doing anything about this. In October 2014, interestingly, the Minister of Social Affairs said, "The country is no longer officially accepting any Syrian refugees except in humanitarian cases. In addition, the United Nations asserted that Lebanon has increased its restrictions in receiving Syrian refugees. This was a different minister, but the two ministers were holding the same position. Few months later, in January 2015, legal residency regulations were set on Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and the refugees already living in unbearable conditions were requested by the state to pay $200 fee per person to be granted a residency permit. Between 2016 to 2018, Human Rights Watch documented that at least 10,000 Syrians were forcibly evicted in different municipalities in Lebanon, of which 7,500 were in Bekaa with the support of the Lebanese army. And in 2019, and just last month, a local municipality forced a Syrian family to dig up the body of its 4-year-old son, as the cemetery is for Lebanese only. Unfortunately, the perception to Syrian refugees in Lebanon today reflects not only a decline in empathy, but hatred and dehumanization. The media in Lebanon is also playing an important role in further dehumanizing refugees and framing them as the other. I'm going to put now a 1 minute, 18 seconds video from AJ Plus that also highlights a couple of media incidents in the coverage of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. There's no need to translate. It has Arabic and English subtitles. And within the same scope, just last month too, a national TV posted this caricature of a school. It displays two Lebanese children standing outside the school with a sign saying, "Sorry for the inconvenience, but the school is overloaded with Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, Indians, Negroes, Ethiopians, and Bangladeshis." This caricature was shared widely on social media to highlight the extent of racism against refugees in the country later on. And interestingly here, in the scope of social media, we all know the hashtag with refugees, and it's noticeable that this hashtag is also, it creates a sense of oneness because of the width, and so it also touches on the theme of empathy. Now from here, I want to move to the question of why are the people in Lebanon empathizing or not empathizing with Syrian refugees? Unfortunately, I can't cover all Lebanon, so I am basically pointing out some of the points that were mentioned during the field interviews of the refugee hosts in Lebanon. First of all, there is the historical aspect. One of the important reasons mentioned by interviewees to empathize is that they have themselves been displaced during the war, whether the civil war or other internal conflicts in Lebanon. Many shared their personal stories of displacement and how they were themselves supported or hosted by other families. And also, they mentioned this as a memory, but as a possible experience that they may experience again in the future. Another historical reason that was mentioned, but rather not to emphasize, is the history of the Syrian presence in Lebanon, where the Syrian army forces has been in Lebanon for 25 years, from 1976 until 2005. And people in Lebanon referred to the Syrian army forces as the Syrians. So there was no clear differentiation between the Syrian people or the Syrian army. And their presence was linked with torture, killing, stealing, occupying, and a culture of fear ahead of all. So for some Lebanese people, the Syrian nation deserve what is happening to them, because this is what they have done to us, with us being the Lebanese people. The second motive mentioned is the competition on resources, and a big chunk of this is for the employment opportunities. Many people shared with us experiences of people that they know who have lost their jobs and they were substituted with Syrian labor. And it's important to note here that ILO has also documented that the influx of refugees affected the socioeconomic situation of Lebanese, but usually Lebanese people highlight only that the Syrian labor is replacing them, but no one speaks about being underpaid or about child labor and the miserable work conditions that Syrian refugees accept to work in. Also, the demand on services was mentioned by some Lebanese people, and it was blamed on Syrian refugees. The other reason, the other aspect is the cultural aspect, and basically how Hamra Street looks now, because it looks different than what it used to look like. So for example, if you walk now on the street, you see shops with Sham, which is equivalent of Damascus, holding this name, like the presence of these shops that sell Syrian sweets, for example, quote unquote, have made people feel that the street itself is looking different, the city is looking different. And this same theme is highlighted with the presence of more beggars in Hamra Street. But the difference is with the presence of shops, it implies that these people are well established and they are opening shops while we are not even finding a job. There are also, briefly, I'll speak about other reasons, mainly religious duties. Many people are empathizing because this is a religious duty. And another reason, but not to empathize, is the length of the stay, because I think someone commented today that the length of being hosted is like 3 days, and someone else said 40 days, and then you are part of the group. But now it's been 8 years, and so Lebanese people find this question of how long is someone hosted is raised here. Finally, I want to briefly talk about euphemized empathy. Or disguised empathy, because some of the interviews that we conducted, some people mentioned that we are helping them because we are allowing them to rent houses, or we are helping them because we are hiring Syrians. So that is also framed as a form of empathy, while actually it is not. In some cases, it's even child labor. So to conclude briefly, because I'm out of time, we can see that there is not only a decline of empathy in my perception. I think there is also a violation of basic human rights regarding Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and especially now. And I hope that there is a solution, especially that many of these people, the ones who are still in Lebanon, are the ones who cannot actually go back to their country. Thank you.